Marc, you have at least 3 hats. You are the head of climate change investment research for BNP Paribas Asset Management. You served on the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD, and you are on Carbon Trackers Initiative Advisory Board. Because you have 3 hats, I have 3 questions for you. Would you be able to tell us what important metrics TCFD and Carbon Tracker are bringing to the fore when measuring climate risk remains non-standardized? To what extent these have meaningfully changed the behavior of institutional investors? And to your view, what metrics are still missing to get deeper, in particular in light of Suzanne's presentation? Do we have a deal?
Thank you, Perrine, and great to be here in La Politécnica. Buenos días a todos. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm going to try and answer your questions, Perrine, and also give some more ideas of what we are wrestling with on a practical basis as a major institutional investment firm, which is coming under a lot of pressure now from regulators, from our own clients, the asset owners, the people who give money to us to manage on their behalf. There is a very encouraging movement amongst asset owners to decarbonize. I'll talk a little bit about that, and also talk about the trends we're seeing in the, I would say, the broader regulatory framework. Central banks are becoming very important. You're seeing changes in the way that they look at this for the financial system globally. So I'm going to structure my remarks in 3 main comments, and in the course of those comments, I will endeavour to answer your questions, Perrine. So first of all, I'm going to talk about my experience from being on the TCFD, what we learned when we were doing that, and what I think are the key messages that come out of that experience. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the practical challenges now that we as asset managers face. And thirdly, and I think this is very important to emphasize from the beginning, I'm going to talk about the need to distinguish between the means and the ends. I mean, the metrics and the measurements are super important, but it is possible sometimes to become so focused on that you forget why we're measuring these things in the first place. And there is actually a lot of information out there today that allows us already to take meaningful decisions that can help us decarbonize our portfolios and move us towards a Paris-compliant view. So firstly, on the TCFD, the TCFD is still running. We published our big report in 2017. And I think it's very encouraging that you're seeing more and more investors, more and more companies using the TCFD framework as a measurement and reporting tool. A couple of things about the TCFD. It was a voluntary initiative. For those of you not familiar with it, this is an organization or a body that was established by the Financial Stability Board under the chairmanship of Mark Carney, who is currently coming to the end of his term as the governor of the Bank of England. And Michael Bloomberg chaired the TCFD. Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, now running for president of the United States. So you never know, we might end up with some very enlightened metrics coming from that, but we'll see what happens. To me, the most important thing that Mark Carney said about what we were trying to do with the TCFD is the following sentence. We're really trying to create a market in the information that will drive the transition towards a 2-degree world. And what he meant by that, I think, is that markets work on the basis of information. The more information you have, the better the decisions, the better informed the decisions that you can make. And therefore, the TCFD is really about providing transparency and clarity around the key elements that investors need to know in order to make better informed decisions in an increasingly carbon-constrained world. And I think this is exactly what is now beginning to happen. We're seeing, what Carney was effectively saying was, we want to give investors more information, they will ask questions, that will force better disclosure, and in turn that will increase, or it will improve the quality of the questions, and the market will, over time, reach a judgment on which companies are well-placed to deal with the transition towards a 2-degree world and which are not, and the market will start investing in the companies that are well-placed and disinvesting from the companies that are not well-placed. And I think 2 years on, we're really starting to see the effect of that. More and more companies signed up to it, more and more investors signed up to it. Of course, there is a lot more information that we need. For me, the biggest problem now is Scope 3 emissions. Suzanne mentioned this. Scope 3, so in particular, emissions in companies' supply chains. I mean, I've been covering energy markets for 25 years, and I've been looking at the impact of climate change on energy for 15 years. And over the entire 15 years that I've been following this, we've really focused overwhelmingly on Scope 1 emissions. And we've looked at the big fossil fuel producing industries, the power generation industry, the oil and gas industry, coal mining industry, for obvious reasons. But there are many industries out there that are also very carbon intensive in their production processes, who really haven't had the pressure applied to them that they should have had applied to them. And I think Scope 3 is going to be a very important topic now over the next couple of years. We need much better data. And one of the things we're finding on a practical basis as a user of information from specialist data providers such as Sustainalytics and Truecost and MSCI is that in many cases the data is of very low and poor quality. So we're increasing the pressure on the data providers to give us more information. But coming back to the point about creating a market in the transition to a 2-degree world, one of the most recent and certainly most interesting developments we are seeing as an asset manager is our clients saying to us, okay, you're managing this money on our behalf, or we may even want to give you more money, but we want you to be able to tell us what is the implied temperature of the portfolio of companies you are invested in. So we're really talking about entering a new world where people want to know the implied temperature of a portfolio of assets. Now, this is going to be an extremely complicated thing to do, but ultimately, if the pressure is there on us as asset managers to come up with ways of doing that, we're going to need better information, we're going to need better metrics, but we also have to deliver something to the client. So I think over the next 2 to 3 years, this will be the hottest topic in asset management as far as dealing with climate change is concerned. And in order to be able to do that, we really will need better information on Scope 3 emissions in particular. I wanted to say something in the time remaining about, I mentioned the means and ends, okay? Of course we need better information, it goes without saying, and we need to improve the metrics. But there's already a lot of information out there, and we mustn't let the endless pursuit for better data prevent us from making some of the decisions we can already make today. We know, for example, that the world is moving rapidly towards renewable energy, and I think one overwhelmingly important lesson we can learn from the energy transition as it has already been playing out in the European power sector is that renewable energy is fundamentally different from fossil fuel energy on an economic basis. We know it's different environmentally, much better environmentally, but it's fundamentally different from an economic point of view, and this should really inform the way we think about the energy transition. What I mean by this is very simple. Renewable energy, by its very nature, is deflationary, And fossil fuel energy, by its very nature, is inflationary. Now, this is a very simple thing to say, and it's actually a very simple concept to grasp, but the implications of this are enormous, and it takes time for investors and companies to understand these implications. But let me just conclude with this insight, and perhaps we can pursue the point later in the discussion. If you think about the oil industry, the highest returns in the oil industry are in the upstream part of the value chain. You go and explore for oil, you produce oil in difficult, challenging conditions. Investors want a high return for that. Typically 15 to 20% is the return that you target on that. With renewable energy, there is no upstream. You don't have to go and explore for it. You don't have to produce it. You just have to build infrastructure that captures the energy that is freely available when the sun shines and when the wind blows. Now, what that means in turn is that if all of the cost, or nearly all of the cost for renewable energy is in the infrastructure, and the cost of the infrastructure has been falling very aggressively over the last 10 years, that's why it's a deflationary source of energy, and that's why it is going to undermine the economics of the fossil fuel industry globally in the same way that it has already undermined the economics of the traditional power generation industry in Europe. So this is a very big insight that you without having to know all of the details about Scope 3 emissions here and Scope 3 emissions there, and I emphasize again, we do want that information, but you can already start redirecting capital towards the energy sources of the future and away from the energy sources of the past. As I mentioned, we are under more and more pressure from our clients to do that. You're going to see a continuing move away from fossil fuel energy in investor portfolios as the pressure grows to align with the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much.